Hello, everybody from Berlin. Gosh, this sounds like that Eurovision Song Contest, doesn't it? Okay, what my theme today is going away from university and students and into companies, which is where my experience and my background is. And what I want to do is very simply look at two things. We're looking at contracts, and I'd like to look first of all at some perspectives which different people in companies have of contracts. In other words, different people working in companies in different parts of the world. And then after that, I'll spend a few minutes suggesting some training activities which you might like to use or adapt for your own context. So if we start by looking at some quotes, and these are quotes from various business people I've worked with over the years. This is a typical one where a business person says he received this surprising comment from his business partner in Asia. This was a European talking to an Asian. And the Asian says, I'm sorry, someone else has signed the contract, we have to renegotiate. And of course, for a European business person, or a Western, I should say, this might come as something of a surprise. And I've heard this time and time again. I've even heard it between Chinese people talking about other Chinese people. So what I've done here is taken these quotes, but I've taken away what country or what company they've come from, because they could actually come from anywhere. This is another perspective of some people's thoughts about contracts. It's just a piece of paper. It's meaningless. And contracts are about people, not about papers. And in fact, if you take that to its extreme, one party can see the other side as being obsessed with paperwork as opposed to with people. This is one which lots of us have probably experienced personally. Let's start the work. The contract is in the post. And I know I've certainly written for various publishers or worked with various companies, finished and been paid, and the contract has never arrived. And I'm sure that's an experience which all of us share. Here's another one. This is a complaint really, it was a Western company, and it's just giving the perspective of what happens when the other side actually changes the rules or plays by different rules. So here what's happened is the other company has signed, and that's it. They just carry on doing their own thing. In other words, the contract to them appears to be meaningless, depending on which perspective you look at it. And of course, for the person who signed it from the original company, in other words, the person who wrote this, the issue is one that he has customers to deal with. He's just a middleman. He's buying products, building them together into some sort of product or service, and then passing them on to a customer. So changing contract rules doesn't only affect the partner you're dealing with, but it also carries on into the rest of the business network. And the response, of course, is that they're not flexible enough. They want to stick by the papers, by the details in the contract. This is another interesting one, I think, where the person, the buyer or the seller who's negotiating the contract comes back and says, I'm happy to work like this. I understand that the other side has different perspectives on contracts and plays by different rules. But it's my boss who can't accept that, and I have to play the rules according to my boss's game as well as to my negotiating partner's game. There's one question people ask sometimes. Are they honest? People look at this as if to say, well, they're playing by different rules, therefore that has something to do with honesty. And perhaps one interpretation of this is not to say they are honest or dishonest, but just to look at different rules for what is right and wrong. Some countries and some cultures just interpret things differently. I love this one. I said to one manager the other week, in fact, this is quite a recent one, and I said, well, why don't you just take a lawyer in if these contracts are so complicated or difficult to tie down? And he said, well, if we take a lawyer with us, he just advises us not to do business. And that just doesn't solve the problem. We still have to do business. We have to find a way to work with people whose perspective of contracts is different. And there's another one. They have the wrong priorities. The other side has the wrong priorities. Okay. Now, what this actually means when we have all these perspectives is that there's a certain amount of tension in any contract negotiation, any contract relationship. For example, one side might see the contract as a framework, whereas the other side might see the contract as the details, which will lead, if necessary, to a court of arbitration. Another perspective is to say that a contract is between people and not between companies. Another one, contracts are unimportant. It's about trust and personal relationships. And the fourth one is that the contract itself is seen as inflexible and can't deal with the changes that happen in everyday business nowadays. And so people are flexible, and let's just not use the contract. So there are lots of different tensions here. Now, there are other issues as well, besides these perspectives from the people who are actually working with these negotiations. One, of course, is the whole point about legal terminology. Now, we all, as business English teachers, probably struggle with some of these words and some of this terminology. But the main issue is, as soon as you cross a border, people are working to different legal rules, jurisdictions, different backgrounds, different historical reasons for doing something in a certain way. And so very often, the contract just means something completely different, even if it can be translated. Professor Bhatia talks about interdiscursivity. In other words, what he's saying is many of us see these contracts or professional documents as texts, but actually they're far more than that. There's a whole range of contexts which are involved, and we have to understand these texts not only as texts, in other words, a fixed piece of paper with writing on it, but also as a genre which is dynamic in its relationship. Genres are not fixed, but also take into account what's happening in the professional practice, in other words, the world that these people are working in, and also the professional cultures. And all these things intermesh with each other and make the whole thing, for us as teachers, quite complex because we're coming in from outside. I'll give you an example of this. If we look at market pressure nowadays, certainly a lot of the books on how to do intercultural communication talk about, well, we have to build up relationships. We have to allow time, perhaps, to understand the other side.